Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and our next guest is the film and video producer for the Capital Research Center, also founder of their Dangerous Documentaries project. Jake Klein is on with us. Jake, thanks for taking some time out with us. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing as well as can be, given the times outside. But thank you so much for having me, Joe. I'm really happy to be with you.
Well, now you guys have done a series of programs on capitalism versus COVID-19. I've taken the tack that right now we're going into the phase of this pandemic where it's COVID versus the Constitution. But since the Constitution was established to sort of set up the ground rules for an Adam Smith-style free market governing body, I think we're working at the same angle here, that this is a game that has very little to do with nuclear biology or anything like that, or medicine at all.
Well, I agree with you to a certain extent. I think that you're 100% right that we are ignoring individual liberty and individual freedom in the question of what do you do about the virus and how do we react to the virus as a society. I do at the same time, I'm a person that thinks the virus is a really severe issue.
Oh, yeah.
That it does require a lot of action to mitigate the damage that it's going to do and to protect our population, and that it could be a really big disaster without mitigation strategies. But where I'm more critical is I think those mitigation strategies are not being handled well by the government. The government fundamentally can't have the information to know what's best for individuals on the ground to do to protect themselves. And the centralization of our response through government is really damaging us, making things worse. And yeah, like you say, it's an economic issue.
Well, and let me make clear, I mean, my mother passed away because of COVID-19. I mean, I'm not one of those COVID-denying talk show hosts, so...
I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to say it that way, but I just want to make it clear, because there are a lot of people who do what I do that are convinced that it's some sort of made up, with the moon landing, kind of thing, and I'm not. And I didn't mean to put it in that perspective, but I agree with you that you're right on, because the free market could have, and is, even despite the best efforts of government, doing more towards fighting COVID-19. I want to jump on the first thing that really strikes me is the World Health Organization insisted that there was no empirical proof that hydroxychloroquine could do anything as a treatment without further testing. And then about a week and a half ago announced they weren't going to do any more testing on it. So I guess they can have their cake and eat it too, because they haven't done the empirical testing, then they can't approve. And it just seems like, we're trying to come up with solutions. In part, you mentioned how the centralized government, but is part and parcel of that also the way in which centralized government views its citizens as sort of panicky, shallow, easily duped. So, we got to feed them as little information as possible and just line them up, where once we've come up with a decision?
Well, I think that's a really great point. Just going back a brief second, I just want to again express my sorrow to you and your family for your loss, and also note that this is really personal for me and my family as well.
Oh gosh!
Luckily, I haven't lost anyone yet, but my dad is a doctor at Johns Hopkins, fighting this on the front line.
Oh, God bless him.
And my mom is immunocompromised and was on a ventilator last year for another issue. And, if she gets this, she's in the house where...
Oh, God, yeah.
It would be a real problem. So it's personal for me, too. And
Absolutely.
In line with it being personal, I think in terms of what you just noted about the way the government thinks about their citizens, in terms of being panicky, and, not being able to know what to do on their own, and, relying on government guidance, to be able to figure out what their right actions are is really, really bad and really, really dangerous. We need to be teaching our citizens to be critical thinkers who can understand, the nuance of this issue. Yes, not everybody's going to be a scientist. We need to refer to experts. Mm-hmm. But when we get in the habit of deferring our safety and health knowledge to another body, we become that panicky, not fully educated, not fully understanding the situation seasonally. And if we got government out of the business of telling everybody what they should think, and really left people with the need to have more personal responsibility, to actually go out, make sure they're and when I say go out, I don't mean go out of your homes.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Respecting people, but go out on the internet and in your desire to seek knowledge, to figure out, what the risks are, weigh that against their personal risk profiles, given their status in life and their needs,
Right.
Are you a person like me who has an immunocompromised family and needs to be super cautious? Or are you a person that's not going to be interacting with people like that very much and is, safe themselves? Those people have different needs, and we can't weigh our personal risk profiles with a one-size-fits-all solution passed down by, the supposed expert class. And there really are experts in those classes, but, no expert can know what's best for every single individual.
Jake Klein is on with us from the Capital Research Center. We have to take a quick break here, Jake. Can we hang on to you? I want to continue on this because it's really, I think, at the crux of everything.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine. We put, you're repeating it along at home with me, aren't you? Jake Klein, documentary filmmaker, research director at the Capital Research Center. We're talking about capitalism versus COVID-19 and the approaches that really should be helping shepherd us along. When we went to break, we were sort of getting into the sad state of affairs where government looks upon us as somebody who will easily be duped by some pharmaceutical overlord who will pass on a magic cure over the internet. I think we're all capable. The people I know, and I know an awful lot of them, all can grasp the difference, Jake, between has some effect and is an out and out cure. But folks like the CDC seem to be more concerned that if we say it has some efficacy, we immediately hear that it's a magic pill.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on hydroxychloroquine and whether it's good or not. But here's what I can tell you, which is the CDC and the FDA and the same government bodies that are regulating that issue have done a terrible job in other areas of this crisis. So, for example, the New York Times, which is usually a lot more friendly to organizations like the FDA than I am, who fundamentally doesn't believe that should be an organization that even exists. But they covered a story where there was a Seattle flu study associated with one of the universities up there. And they, early on in the crisis, when I think there had just been one documented case in the Washington State area, they wanted to understand how widespread the coronavirus issue was to figure out what did they need to do in Washington to clamp down and stop the spread. And they've been collecting all these samples from people with the flu to test for some reason or the other. And they wanted to take those samples and see, was it actually the flu or was it coronavirus? Mm-hmm. And do we need to tell these patients, hey, you need to quarantine yourself because you have coronavirus and we have to stop this from better. And they had to ask, because of, I believe, patient privacy regulations around those tests, they had to ask the FDA and the CDC and the state regulatory body in Washington State, can we test these for COVID? And they were told no repeatedly. This was a fast-moving issue.
Mm-hmm.
And the CDC told them they had to go through, sorry, it may have been the FDA, not the CDC, told them they had to go through an emergency authorization process to be allowed to do that. But the emergency authorization process was so slow, it could only be done by snail mail, that the advantage was lost, and they weren't able to do this as thoroughly as they wanted in time and manner. They did eventually start testing these samples illegally out of ethical concerns. And what did they find? They found a case of COVID in a high schooler who had been, going to high school and possibly infecting people. So the regulatory bureaucracy of these organizations has been extraordinarily damaging to our ability to fight this virus.
Let me ask you this, because we're talking about private industry. So if the marketplace had been looking for this, it's a simple form. Can we share your data with a survey that we're doing? I took part of it when I took lymphoma treatments. I signed off on the fact that I was more than happy to allow my results and the doctor's observations and those kind of things to be added to a wiki full of knowledge. But it was it was fairly straightforward.
Yeah, and I think part of the hazard of a big regulatory apparatus is it's not that it's bad to be careful around issues of patient privacy, but when you have that method of doing that, it becomes hard when you need exceptions and you need to move quickly to make that happen. I think if you're a patient that gave a flu sample to that study, you probably care about finding out who's sick and how they're sick, and most importantly, if you're sick with something that you don't know. It's one thing if you're sharing this health information with maybe somebody that you don't want to have it, or some real personal health matter. But this was not that. This was something where obviously the people involved in that flu study would have wanted this to happen, but the regulatory apparatus
So, to play devil's advocate here, Jake Klein is on with us from the Capital Research Center, documentary filmmaker, and I like the way you've been getting a lot of your research out by way of documentary film, Jake. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment here and say, the government is trying to protect us from the profiteers, so what do you say about the idea that the free market could do this without it being, John Paul Getty, cornering the market on the treatment for COVID-19, or even that fellow who quadrupled the price of the EpiPen a few years ago, and we caught him and we punished, but still, that's, I guess, the fear mongering. If I do a ham-handed job of playing devil's advocate.
Well, when you talk about Getty, who I'm not familiar with specifically, but we think about this sort of like class of rich billionaire industrial society that just wants to make as much money as they can and not make it at the cost of the world.
Right.
And I'm not saying that there aren't people like that out there. There are, people that have made their money illicitly. But we have this image in our head, we have the word robber baron to describe it, from like Industrial Revolution era. But actually, most of those sort of rich billionaire industrialists in that period were making things so much cheaper for people and more affordable. They weren't, price gouging. And if they were monopolists of export, they were monopolists who benefited society drastically by so lowering the price of the items that they monopolized. So when it comes to price gouging and, quotation marks around the word gouging, when it comes to this, prices might rise for certain supplies, or they may have risen for certain supplies. But what that does is it heavily incentivizes industry to kick in and make as much more of those in-demand products as possible to make sure that you can equalize supply and demand as rapidly and effectively as possible to make sure that everybody gets the supplies they need, the face masks, the gloves, the hand sanitizer, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and those things especially.
But also it's not even really all that and, about paying for goods, because these companies have been extraordinarily generous in their, just civil service, being good to the rest of society and helping us and doing what they can. I believe Apple donated 10 million face masks, and other companies, Facebook, don't ask me why they had a ton of face masks sitting around, but, they donated hundreds of thousands, and a bunch of other companies have done similar things, and they've done that very effectively and gotten it out and helped people. Meanwhile, if you look at the government response, as for example, as it relates to face masks specifically, they have 1.5 million of them sitting in a warehouse in Indiana and could not get organized to get them released to the public in a timely manner. It did eventually happen, but it was well after all of these other companies had started donating their huge stuff.
Well, and that's the problem with a bureaucratic approach. Jake, one last one then, though, for you. Does the government also, on the subject of regulatory capture, do they, especially in the terms of treatment for things like COVID-19, given the way they, help pharmaceutical companies, and keep the competition down in the pharmaceutical industry for these cures? Can there be regulatory reform there to create more of an open market amongst the pharmaceutical industries so that these products can get to market faster with more innovation?
I'm sure that's the case. I'm not an expert on what's going on in the vaccine development right now and what regulations are getting in the way. I can say that one of the best things that the government has done in this crisis is reducing regulations. So I imagine a lot of that is related to the vaccine development efforts that are going on, although I don't know that for a fact. But Americans for Tax Reform has a page up on their website where they're cataloging all the regulations that governments have removed. When I say governments, I mean the American federal government and our state government, not international governments, to have more effective market responses and hospital responses to what's going on, and it's been massively useful. For example, there were regulations that got in the way of telemedicine, working with the doctor online or through a phone call, and those have been rolled back. But can you imagine why those were ever in place to begin with? Like, imagine if we had allowed the telemedicine market to develop before we got to this place.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
How much better would we be off then? And, in terms of the vaccine and treatment, it's very encouraging to me that from what I hear in the news, and I'm not more educated than anybody else, it does seem like we are working towards a vaccine at a record time. So, I can't say or not for sure if regulatory capture is getting in the way, or if things are just going smoothly and it's getting done and we're going to get there, better than, in any other example in history. I really hope it's the latter. But yeah, we'll find out.
Well, Jake, thank you so much, Jake Klein. What are you working on right now? What else is coming? What video projects are you working on for the Capitol Research Center?
Yeah, so check out our YouTube channel, which is a big part of what I run. The issues that we're discussing here are something that, I have a 5-minute animated video on that I hope people can check out. It's called Capitalism is Curing COVID-19, Government is Making It Worse. If you just type that into YouTube, you'll find it. And also check out dangerousdocumentaries.com, where we just have a variety of films that deal with the issues of big government and the far left impact on our society. And yeah, check out our content. I hope people like it.
Jake, thank you so much for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you, Joe.
And thank you for tuning in this week. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. Until next week, find us online at virginiainstitute.org. And so long, and thanks for all the fish.